To our Meaningful Speech February Lunch and Learn, I have with me today Dr. Lillian Stiegler. I'm going to introduce her to you, and then we will get started in our interview. Dr. Lillian Stiegler recently retired as a full professor. I'm going to just stop right there and ask if you can turn off your audio, whoever that is right now.
We got it.
Let's see here. Okay, good. So, as I was saying, Dr. Lillian Stiegler recently retired as a full professor of communication sciences and disorders at Southeastern Louisiana University. She has over 40 years of experience as a speech-language pathologist. She has contributed to the professional literature and delivered numerous conference presentations and continuing education workshops on state and national levels. She created Louisiana's first graduate level communication disorders course on autism, incorporating a mini camp for autistic children. Dr. Stiegler continues to be active in the profession and provides consultation services to families, colleagues, and school systems. I'm so incredibly happy to have Dr. Stiegler here today. I would like to tell you all that I consider Lily a friend. She and I presented together at the ASHA convention in 2018 and have collaborated together on an ASHA webinar that is now available on Learning Pass, and have just communicated over the years. And she graciously accepted my invitation to come here today to talk about this burning issue that's out there. Why is gestalt language processing not taught in graduate programs? And we're going to get to that, but welcome, Dr. Stiegler.
Hi, everybody. I'm looking at the names. I don't see your faces, but I'm looking at the names, and I see a couple of familiar names. So I just want to say hi and thanks for being here. And I appreciate you, Alex. Everybody knows Alex is doing wonderful, incredible work.
Thank you so much. So I have some questions here that some of our Meaningful Speech members submitted, but I also have some questions of my own. So just to get started, how and when did you come across gestalt language processing?
So that has really not been in the literature very much, as anybody would know if they've tried to find it. It was sort of briefly mentioned in sort of here and there in language textbooks. There was I think it's mentioned one time in Prezant's 84 article with Rydell that was about delayed echolalia. It's mentioned in the CERTS manuals, but you know, those manuals are enormous and comprehensive and huge and kind of daunting. So really the first time that I really understood it for myself was at Marge Blanc's 2014 ASHA presentation. And the only reason I lucked into going to that presentation was because, one, it had the word echolalia in the title, and two, Barry Prezant, one of my heroes, was one of the co-presenters. As it turned out, I don't even think he was there, or maybe he was there for a minute and wasn't there for the whole presentation. But that I didn't know Marge at the time, but that presentation kind of made the earth move for me. And it was Gestalt language processing was presented in such a clear, elegant way. And it just gave me the missing piece that I had been looking for many, many years. And that's because Marge sort of translated and amplified the work of Ann Peters, and I was not aware of that work. So when you search echolalia, that work didn't come up. Another thing that didn't come up was Barry Prezant's article from '82 that talks all about Gestalt language processing, but when you would search echolalia, that wouldn't come up. So I was not aware of those two pieces of literature, and they're really, really important.
Okay, so a couple questions from all of this. So, why are Gestalt language processing and echolalia not connected in the literature? And then, why is all of this literature hidden that even a professor in communication sciences and disorders does not know about it?
So, Ann Peters really had a few things to say about why, and I have my own thoughts about why it hasn't been kind of amplified in the literature over the years. One thing that I can say is that, everybody knows what a meme is, right? A meme, a meme is sort of this element of culture that gets replicated, and, clothing styles or, catchphrases or whatever get really passed along. Well, Alan Kami wrote an article in 2004 called A Meme's Eye View of Speech Pathology. And he really explained, in a way I could understand, how a language is so complex that it doesn't make a very good meme. And the memes that get sort of gain traction and get talked about and written about and studied are the ones that people can easily understand. And so I think maybe that's one of the problems, one of the reasons why Gestalt language processing has not been studied more. The more successful meme was the analytic way, the analytic, sort of trajectory of language acquisition. And nobody had made this clear and transmissible enough so that everybody could understand it. Ann Peters also talked about some other things, which I can go into if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing she said, and I made myself a few notes so I wouldn't forget, because she said 4 things. But one thing she said was that probably in the literature we have shown a preference for studying children who are intelligible. And, if you remember when you were taught how to analyze language samples, if a child said something that was unintelligible, you would just put those X's. Well, researchers did the same thing. And they would eliminate children from their studies that were not intelligible. And we know that little children who are Gestalt processors tend to be unintelligible for longer, or we might just call it jargon or something like that and just say, oh, it's jargon, and not make ourselves listen carefully to see if words are in there. And, it just takes a while for their motor speech to catch up. So I think some Gestalt processors might have been eliminated from studies. I agree with her about that. She also says that we believe that we should analyze children's language into the same parts that we analyze adults' language, and that's not necessarily true. Words, phrases, sentences, for all little children, that, as Ann Peters says, they learn in these units, they pick up units out of the ongoing speech stream. And so that may not be true, that we can analyze their language into the same parts. She also said that we have a presupposition that language acquisition will always progress from simple to complex in this orderly way. And this is all coming from Ann Peters. But she says, what do we mean by simple? Is a one-word utterance always more simple than a multi-word utterance? Maybe not. But we haven't thought that way. And I think, too, her last thing is that we kind of assume that language acquisition follows the same trajectory in all children. And there really, I don't think to this day, there have ever been any well-designed studies to look at language acquisition variation. And that's what we're talking about here. That's the whole, my whole understanding of the root of what we call echolalia is, just a different language acquisition trajectory.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm sure probably everyone listening is unfamiliar with Dr. Ann Peters' work. So I love that you kind of put it down to those 4 points, those really important points. One of the other questions I had asked you earlier that I think is worth kind of discussing a little bit is, why are echolalia and gestalt language processing not linked in the research? And can you kind of talk about how they're different yet connected?
So I think that the people who have studied echolalia, let's talk about the people who have studied echolalia.
Mm-hmm.
A few speech pathologists, but really, really a few. There haven't been many articles. I mean, if you call many dozens and dozens, there haven't been dozens and dozens of articles by speech pathologists in the literature. There just haven't. So another group is the interactional linguists, and they have, thank goodness for them, because they have done these beautiful qualitative studies looking at individuals with echolalia and the functionality of the echolalia, but they have not had that gestalt piece wasn't in the literature base for them to draw from. And so it wasn't, the two were never connected. Mm-hmm. And then the third group of people who have studied, quote unquote, studied echolalia quite a bit are the behavioral researchers. And there are dozens and dozens of articles in their literature about, really how to suppress echolalia, how to extinguish it. And so those are the three groups: SLPs, interactional linguists, and the behavioral researchers that have written about echolalia. And so until now, that part about gestalt, the gestalt, even the idea of gestalt processing has not really been available or amplified for any of those groups of researchers, even speech pathologists, to sort of, put it all together and say, this is the root of what we call delayed echolalia. Mm. And so all I can hope is that now researchers will take that information and start applying it in their studies. And that's what we really need to have happen. Even if it's case studies, even if it's small single subject design studies, that's what we really need to have happen now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, very well. Um, so I recall a story, perhaps when you and Marge Blanc had first met, where you had asked her about stereotypy. And that came into my mind because I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, because you just shared that a lot of the behavioral research is about extinguishing echolalia. I'm wondering just how that sat with you as a professor. A lot of SLPs have said to me they always knew in their hearts that that was wrong, that they shouldn't try to extinguish it, but they just didn't know what else to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that is very true and very frustrating. And, I went to school, I went to undergraduate a long, long time ago. And almost immediately when I came out of school, I was, well, even, back then you got lots of clinical experience, even as an undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think I had maybe one child who used echolalia as a student. Um, and I think what I was taught was very behavioral in nature. Maybe that's what everybody was taught. It was that echolalia was just sort of this not very functional behavior, and it was a behavior, and let's try to get rid of it. So even when I would teach in my class, I used to kind of do this confessional thing with my students where I would say, I have myself written a goal that said something like, the learner will decrease the amount of echolalia used by X percentage from baseline. And that's very embarrassing to me now. And I'm sorry that I wrote that back then, but I really didn't know any better. So, yeah, again, I almost didn't find behavioral literature about echolalia until I understood that they very often refer to it as vocal stereotypy.
Stereotypy, I said it
Yeah,
right.
I
Thank
pronounce
you.
it stereotypy,
Okay.
but I think stereotypy is probably fine. Maybe they say it that way in other places. I don't know.
Thank you.
but but yeah, that is in fact they look at it as just this aberrant behavior. They're really looking only at the surface structure, and we all know that language is a big iceberg, and what you see on the surface is nothing compared to what's going on beneath the surface, right? Um, and so what they're doing is equating quote unquote vocal stereotypy with any other kind of stereotypy, which we now understand so much better, as a lot of the what are called stereotypies or stereotypies are ways to self-regulate, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Stimming. Mm-hmm.
Stimming or whatever. But yeah, that sort of makes the top of my head blow off when I hear people call it vocal stereotypy. And not only that, they would lump delayed echolalia together with, any other kind of sounds that really might be vocal tics, or, coughs or snorts or squeaks, or, sort of sounds that people might make for whatever reason. Sometimes that's a side effect of medication or whatever. That seems to all get lumped together into one big undesirable ball of behavior that many of their studies try to extinguish.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that so thoroughly. I want to get to some of our other questions here, and one of them is about your 2015 article, which is the most recent published article, journal article that we have regarding delayed echolalia and gestalt language processing. So, why did you decide to write it and talk to us about it?
So I decided to write it because of a bad experience that I had around vocal stereotypy. Um, and I should be thankful because this person did lead me to be able to access that whole body of literature. Oh, the lights went off, so wait, I have to move. I'm in the library. Just 1 second.
We were joking about this before recording that she needs to move a lot to keep the lights on.
Sorry, it's on a motion sensor. Might happen again before we're done. But anyway, I had taken a group of my students on a field trip to it was a sort of a preschool program, and it was a hybrid program where they would get 3 hours a day of a sort of a language preschool that was taught by an SLP, and then 3 hours a day of ABA. And so we go and we see the preschool and we see the ABA part. You know, they got to peek into the room. It was really discrete trial training. They get to look into the room while children were doing that. And so at the end of the field trip, the students were all going back to the little bus. And I was thanking it was a psychology doc student who was sort of running the program. And, we're just kind of making small talk. And she asked me, so what do you think about vocal stereotypy? And I went, huh? And she said, vocal stereotypy when they say things that they've heard or things that other people say. And I said, oh, you mean echolalia? Okay. She said, okay. And I said, well, we view it as something very positive, that it is, because even back then, this is somewhere 2008, 9, somewhere in there. We know that it has communicative functions, and we look at it kind of as a bridge to a more conventional way of using language. And you could just watch her face completely shut down. And I said, you know what? I'll send you some articles. As soon as I get home, I'll send you some articles. And I did. And I sent her Présent's 2 seminal articles, one Présent and Duchamp from 1981, and one with Présent and Rydell from 1984. And the first one was about immediate echolalia, the second one is about delayed echolalia. But she was having none of that. And I was shaking. I was so upset. And that's what got me started to work on the article. Obviously, it didn't come out until 2015 because I was really busy. But and I had some other things sort of in the pipeline before that. But that's what got me started to write it.
So yes, thank you for all of that. And I'm going to link to that when I post this video. So those of you that are watching or will watch the recorded version will be able to have access to that. Okay, so let's get into your teaching. So you met Marge Blanc in 2014. I'm assuming after that you read her book, Natural Language Acquisition. Tell us how you decided to start teaching about Gestalt language processing at Southeastern Louisiana.
So I had been teaching this very specific graduate course on autism, and specifically communication in autism. Had been teaching it for quite a while. And I used to teach everything I knew about echolalia, um, sort of what it sounded like. And I had many videos of children that I had worked with over the years or who were in our clinic. And I used to teach about the types, um, sort of what immediate echolalia was and what I knew about delayed echolalia. And then the whole idea of mitigation as something that we should really be on the lookout for. And if we heard them begin to mitigate, and I would give many examples of little kids changing, and really they sometimes would change what they heard and give you an immediate echo with a little change in it, or something that they had said for a while and then change that up. And that was always part of my teaching. Listen carefully for those mitigations. And if you hear that, you're making progress.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You were so ahead of the game, by the way, everyone. We're going to talk about what everyone else in the country was doing, but that's huge that you were already teaching all of that.
I mean, that's really was in that information was in those early present articles, which I used to post for my students to read. I don't know if they would always read them, but I always used to post the PDFs of those. And we would talk about it as a bridge to more conventional ways of communicating. Also, Hannon, I got Hannon certification. Hannon has a very positive outlook on echolalia. I can't share everything about Hannon. They hold their stuff very close, but even the stuff that's out there in the public domain is very, very positive about echolalia. But when I heard Marge and devoured her book and started talking to her, there was no way I couldn't share that information with the students. Because before I had some strategies that I would share with them around immediate echolalia, and I have those in the article. They came from one of my teachers in graduate school named Paul Miller, who was really on top of echolalia. And, he supervised me in clinic, and I got to practice some of these strategies on my client in grad school. But I didn't have a lot of clear information to give my students about what to do about delayed echolalia.
Mm-hmm.
So when I understood what Marge was doing by reading her book and talking to her, and then read Ann Peters, which just, sort of solidified everything, then I felt like I couldn't not share that with the students. And I immediately made up PowerPoint slides about it. And they started using it in their clinics, which was wonderful. And they'd come back and tell me stories. Oh, I tried it with this child and she used to do this and now she's doing this, so it was a wonderful, exciting time.
That's amazing. I think probably a lot of us listening here did not have the experience that your students had. I certainly did not. One of your students just wrote in the chat and said that her name is Megan, and she said, as a past student, I didn't know Gestalt language processing wasn't something that wasn't normally taught. In my workplaces, I was the only one explaining it to my coworkers. And I've had contact with some of your former students, and they've told me similar stories. I think they're surprised now that it's getting all this attention because for them, it's kind of like, well, wasn't this always out there? So let's talk about that. Why is this not being taught in other graduate programs?
So I think it's because since it hasn't been amplified in the literature, it hasn't made it into textbooks. And if you have, you know, as far as I know, I didn't really use, well, as far as I know, there isn't a textbook that really is appropriate for a graduate course in speech language pathology, focusing on communication in autism. There are some out there, they're a little bit too behavioral, from even the ones written by speech pathologists. So they really, I didn't use them for my class. I ended up in the last few years, from 2015 on, I used Barry Prezant's Uniquely Human, and just tried to sort of shape my course around that. But I think that it is not taught in other grad programs just because it hasn't been laid out clearly in an organized outline in textbooks. And so if whoever's doing the teaching is not necessarily obsessed with echolalia like I was, then they wouldn't know. At this time, we have to get it into the textbooks. And that's going to take some time. I think 20 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, it will start to show up in textbooks. I mean, it's on the ASHA website. So that's a start. You know, what we really need, and I'm talking to everyone out there, what we really need is for clinicians to start presenting their data one by one, or two by two, or whatever you feel comfortable doing at conferences. Share it with your colleagues, because it may seem new to your colleagues. And what would be really great is if some of the ASHA rock stars would start writing about it. And I think that will happen because, you know, some of the people in this chat right now might be ASHA rock stars one day.
Yeah.
So you might. And that's, you know, in order for it to sort of gain its rightful place along with what is in the textbooks now, which is still true and it's still important, but we have a long way to go for people to really understand that there are two different trajectories. And that's, you know, it's frustrating that the literature we have to draw on is a little bit older, but that doesn't make it bad.
Right.
And to be honest, the interactional linguistics literature is much newer. And another cool thing is that now there's all this technology. You might be familiar with the Lina technology, and I did look up the meaning of those letters, but I'm not going to remember it now. But there's technology to sort of record all the language that the child is immersed in, so what the child hears all day long. And that, I think that's going to push this into the minds and hearts of big time researchers at big research universities. Let me also say one other thing, and Marge says this too in her book. I really think that sort of delayed echolalia got way more complicated whenever VHS came along. So whenever we started to have sort of videos that a child could listen to over and over and watch over and over and over again, I think that gave us a whole new part of the puzzle. It complicated our work because we went from VHS to DVD to streaming, whatever we use now. And little children fall in love with those videos and or movies or apps or whatever they have, and they listen to it over and over again. And so I don't really know when that happened, in the 80s sometime. That's when you started getting to infinity and beyond, and those sorts of long gestalts in children, in autistic children, who, have the ability to just pick up these enormously long gestalts from movies if they've heard it enough times, or sometimes if they only hear it once. But I still think that our work was complicated by the media.
That's a really, really good point. Someone had written this in the chat, and I'm curious. They're wondering if this is taught to linguists who are getting an education in linguistics. Is this in their program at all? Do they ever bring up Gestalt language processing?
That I do not know.
Okay. That's something I think maybe we can look into a little bit. I'm curious.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have just a couple more questions to finish this up, but as I mentioned to everyone earlier, you are retired now. Yay, congrats. Is this still being taught in your program? Is this something that is still part of? Oh, I see that. Okay, tell us more.
So no, I don't think it is. And that makes me really sad, but it also makes me want to keep talking about it. I'm working on my proposal for ASHA, which is in New Orleans in November. So I hope I will get a chance. We're having some issues around ABA, what's okay for ABA to do when it comes to communication, and it's not a good situation in my state, and so I feel like I have to keep talking about it. And one of the things is just the idea that they tend to try to get the child to suppress echolalia.
Yeah. So something that I share often on my social media account and with those that have enrolled in the course is that we just need to keep educating. So I often get the question, how do we work with teachers? How do we work with these other therapists that don't understand? And I think the answer really is just education. You're going to try to suppress something when that's what you've been taught and you don't understand it. But if you open your eyes to, everything that we are putting out there right now, and we can educate people differently, then they might start to change what they're doing.
Right. Alex, I also wanted to share with you that if anybody wants a bibliography, the bibliography that I have, just so you can look at some of the articles that I've been talking about.
Absolutely.
I would be happy to share that.
And I will link it underneath the video. Yeah. A lot of people are saying yes, please.
Yeah. So I can give you that. Also, I can give you a link to ASHA's little pyramid about evidence-based practice. And I think if you look at that, you will feel very comfortable that you can defend this type of language therapy very easily. So I'll send that. I also have Marge and I did a presentation in 2018 at ASHA that talks about it has some cute little pictures and talks about the evidence base for Gestalt language processing. And this past ASHA, I did something about helping teachers understand
Oh,
what,
perfect. We need
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. So I'll be happy to share all of that with people.
Yay, thank you so much. And our time has come to an end, but thank you so much for being here with us today. This has been a really important discussion, and I know all the people that are listening live are incredibly thankful for you making the time to be here today.
It was a lot of fun, and I'm hoping that some of you go out. I think the ASHA's call for papers came out yesterday or the day before, and they want proposals by April 6th. So if you have a client, a cool client that's making progress with the therapy that you're doing, don't be shy to submit to present a poster, and then you would get to come to New Orleans and eat our wonderful food. Um, so thanks, everybody. It was fun to talk to you.
Thank you. And this recording will be available on our YouTube channel. And for those of you enrolled in the course, it will also be available in the course. You can go back and watch it as many times as you want to and share it with whoever needs to see it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Dr. Stiegler.